Hello and welcome back to the Sleepy Historian. Find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and let the quiet of the evening settle around you. Tonight, we are not walking through the silent halls of a museum or poring over dusty maps. Instead, we are journeying deep into the heart of a Mesoamerican jungle, following in the footsteps of a young woman whose destiny is tied to the fate of kingdoms. Did you know that for a Maya princess, a marriage proposal wasn't just a promise of love, but often a perilous diplomatic mission fraught with political intrigue and the constant threat of ambush? It was a journey that could either forge a lasting peace or ignite a devastating war. If you enjoy these quiet explorations into the past, please consider subscribing. It helps our small corner of history continue to grow. Now, let us begin. In the grand city of Mutal, known to us today as Tikal, the air itself hummed with power. Towering limestone pyramids pierced the jungle canopy, their temple crests catching the first and last light of the sun. Down below, in the labyrinthine corridors of the royal palace, lived a young woman named Ixkain. She was not just any noble. She was the daughter of the Ajo, the divine ruler. Her world was one of rigid ceremony and profound responsibility. From dawn, when the scent of copal incense drifted from the temples, to dusk, when the calls of howler monkeys echoed through the stone plazas, her life was a tapestry of ritual and education. She learned the complex glyphs of her people, memorizing the lineages of gods and kings. She studied the movements of the stars, understanding how they dictated the rhythms of war and agriculture. She was taught the intricate dances of the court and the subtle language of diplomacy, where the gift of a single jade bead could speak volumes. Her existence was privileged, yet circumscribed. A precious vessel for a sacred bloodline, destined to be a crucial piece in the great, unforgiving game of Maya politics. The day the emissaries arrived, the humidity seemed to thicken with anticipation. They came from Karnal, the Serpent Kingdom, the great rival of Mutal. Their procession was a spectacle of wealth and power, a deliberate display meant to awe and intimidate. Their lords were adorned in jaguar pelts and quetzal feathers of an impassable green, their faces stern beneath elaborate headdresses. They did not come with threats of war, but with something far more complex, a proposal of marriage. They sought the hand of Ixkain for their own young Ajo. In the great audience hall, beneath the painted gaze of ancestors on the stucco walls, the offer was laid out. It was a political masterstroke. An alliance that could reshape the balance of power across the entire Petane Basin. For Ixkain's father, the Ajo of Mutal, the choice was agonizing. To accept was to send his daughter into the heart of his enemy's domain, a gilded cage from which she might never return. To refuse was to insult the Serpent Kingdom and invite the very war this marriage sought to prevent. For days, the priests consulted the sacred almanacs and performed divination rituals, seeking guidance from the gods. The council of nobles debated endlessly, but in the end, the decision rested on the fragile shoulders of diplomacy and on Ixkain. She understood her duty. She was a princess of Mutal, and her life belonged not to herself, but to her people. The proposal was accepted. The preparations for the journey were a monumental undertaking, a testament to the wealth and organizational power of Mutal. The city's workshops buzzed with activity day and night. Weavers created bolts of impossibly fine cotton textiles, dyed in brilliant hues of crimson, indigo, and saffron. Potters crafted exquisite polychrome ceramics, each vessel painted with scenes of gods and heroes, destined to be part of her dowry. Scribes prepared codices, folding books of fig bark paper, detailing the glorious history of her lineage. But the true wealth lay in the sacred objects. Chests filled with polished jade, the color of new corn, carved into intricate pendants and ear spools. There were mosaics of turquoise and shell, obsidian mirrors that seemed to hold the darkness of the night sky, and above all, the feathers. Countless iridescent tail feathers from the quetzal bird, more valuable than gold, were gathered to create fans, capes, and adornments for her headdress. A retinue was carefully chosen. It was not merely a group of companions, but a mobile court. It included seasoned warriors, their shields and obsidian-bladed spears a constant reminder of the journey's danger. Priests were chosen to read the omens and perform the necessary rituals along the way. Scribes to document the journey, and ladies-in-waiting, noblewomen who were both her confidants and her political eyes and ears in a new, foreign court. For Ixcain, these preparations were a slow, ceremonial farewell to everything she had ever known. The day of departure arrived under a sky the color of pearl. The great central plaza of Mutal was a sea of people, a riot of color and sound. The air was thick with the scent of copal, flowers, and the nervous energy of the crowd. The procession was led by priests chanting invocations, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. Then came the warriors, their jaguar pelt banners held high. And then, carried aloft in an ornate litter curtained with fine cotton and adorned with feathers, was Ixcain. She was a vision of royal splendor, her face painted with sacred symbols, her body adorned with jade that felt cool against her skin. She was no longer just a daughter. She was a living symbol of the alliance, the embodiment of a fragile peace. As her litter was lifted, a great roar went up from the crowd. The sound of drums, clay flutes, and turtle-shell percussion filled the air, a powerful symphony to send her on her way. The procession moved slowly, deliberately, out from the shadow of the great jaguar temple, past the bowl courts and market squares, and onto the great Sakbi, the raised limestone causeway that led out of the city. For the first few days, the journey was deceptively simple. They moved through lands firmly under Mutal's control, a landscape of managed forests and prosperous villages where people came out to pay homage. But Ixcain knew this was just the prelude. The true journey, the dangerous journey, lay ahead in the untamed green heart of the world. The manicured landscape of Mutal's domain soon gave way to the primal chaos of the deep jungle. The wide, paved Sakbi dissolved into a narrow, winding footpath, a muddy track carved through a world of overwhelming green. The canopy above was so thick that the sunlight dappled the forest floor in shifting, unpredictable patterns. The air grew heavy, wet, and alive with the sounds of a million unseen things. The rhythmic march of the procession was replaced by the arduous slog of pushing through tangled vines and navigating treacherous terrain. Giant saber trees, the sacred pillars holding up the sky, towered over them like silent guards. Monkeys chattered and swung through the branches, and the brilliant flash of a macaw's wing was a startling jewel against the endless green. For Ixcain, confined for much of the time to her litter, the jungle was an assault on the senses. The sweet, cloying scent of unknown blossoms mixed with the smell of damp earth and decay. The constant hum of insects was a maddening symphony. And at night, the sounds intensified. The cough of a distant jaguar, the hiss of a snake, the unidentifiable cries of nocturnal creatures. This was the world beyond the control of kings and priests, a realm of ancient powers and sudden, unpredictable danger. The structured, ceremonial life of the palace felt a world away. Here, survival was the only ritual that mattered. In the heart of the wilderness, the priests in her retinue became more important than ever. Every event, no matter how small, was a potential message from the guards. The journey was not just a physical movement across the land, but a spiritual passage that had to be carefully navigated. The head priest, a stern, elderly man named Arkin, spent his evenings charting the stars from any clearing they could find, his face illuminated by the flickering firelight as he consulted his sacred books. One afternoon, as the procession forded a shallow, muddy stream, a great shadow passed over them. They looked up to see a magnificent jaguar, its spotted coat a perfect camouflage against the dappled light, standing on a high bank. It watched them for a long moment, its tail twitching, before melting back into the undergrowth without a sound. The party froze. A palpable tension gripped the warriors. Was it a good omen or a bad one? The jaguar was a symbol of royal power, and the night sun, a creature of immense spiritual force. Our kin gathered the nobles and declared it a sign of favor from the guards of the underworld, a confirmation of the royal power they carried with them. But a younger priest argued that its appearance in the daytime was unnatural, a warning of hidden enemies and treachery that walked in the light. The debate sowed a seed of unease among the retinue. The jungle was no longer just a physical obstacle. It was now filled with whispers and portents, and every shadow seemed to hold a hidden meaning. The whispers of the priests soon found a more tangible form. They were now deep in the borderlands, a contested zone of shifting allegiances, where the influence of the great cities of Mutal and Carnal waned. It was a patchwork of smaller, fiercely independent kingdoms whose loyalties could be bought or swayed. The scouts, moving like ghosts ahead of the main party, returned one evening with grim news. A patrol of warriors had been spotted ahead. They did not fly the banners of the Serpent Kingdom, but those of a minor Ajo, a local lord known for his unpredictable temper and his resentment of the great powers. Their path lay directly through his territory. The next morning they found the way blocked. A line of warriors, their bodies painted for battle, their spears and atlatls held at the ready, stood across the narrow path. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a sneer on his face, demanded a toll for passage. It was extortion, a blatant challenge to the authority of Mutal. The captain of Ixcain's guard, a veteran of many campaigns, wanted to force their way through. But the head diplomat in the retinue knew that a skirmish here could be disastrous. It would slow them down, cost them lives, and be seen as an act of aggression, potentially jeopardizing the entire marriage alliance. Instead, he began a tense negotiation. Gifts were offered: fine ceramics, bolts of cloth, obsidian tools. Words were exchanged, a careful dance of flattery and veiled threats. For hours, the two groups faced each other under the suffocating jungle heat, the fate of the mission hanging on a thread of diplomacy. After a tense negotiation and a reluctant payment of tribute, the procession was allowed to pass. The encounter left everyone on edge, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. A few days later, they arrived at a small, fortified outpost loyal to Mutal, a tiny island of order in the vast wilderness. It was little more than a wooden palisade surrounding a few thatched-roof buildings, but to the weary travelers, it felt like a sanctuary. Here, they could finally rest. The warriors repaired their gear and stood guard on the walls, while the servants replenished their supplies of water and food. For Ixcain, it was a chance to leave the confines of her litter. She walked along the palisade, looking out not at the familiar pyramids of her home, but at the endless, menacing wall of green jungle that surrounded them. She spoke with the wife of the outpost's commander, a woman who had made her life in this remote place. They talked not of politics or destiny, but of simpler things. The difficulty of growing maize in the jungle soil, the remedies for insect bites, the fear that came with every strange sound in the night. In that quiet conversation, Ixcain felt a flicker of connection, a shared experience of being a woman far from home, bound by duty. For a brief moment, she was not a princess or a political pawn, but simply a young woman, filled with a quiet dread and a profound sense of loneliness for the life she had left behind. The journey continued, and soon they faced their greatest natural obstacle yet, the Mesoamerica River, a vast, powerful serpent of brown water that carved its way through the jungle. It was too wide and too deep to ford. The river was the lifeblood of the region, a major artery for trade and travel, but it was also a place of immense danger. The current was strong and unpredictable, and its murky depths were home to crocodiles. The party's engineers and laborers, who had traveled with them for this very purpose, set to work. They felled massive trees, lashing the logs together with thick vines to create sturdy rafts. It was a slow, laborious process that took several days. While they worked, The rest of the party camped on the riverbank, the warriors keeping a nervous watch. The crossing itself was the moment of maximum vulnerability. The precious dowry, the supplies, and the people were loaded onto the rafts. Ixcain's litter was secured in the center of the largest one. As they pushed off into the current, they were at the mercy of the river. The rafts bucked and swayed. The paddlers strained, their muscles taut, fighting to keep them on course. Ixcain could hear the water rushing beneath her, a powerful, indifferent force. She saw a log in the water nearby, and for a terrifying second, thought it was a crocodile. The entire procession was exposed, a slow-moving target on the open water, and every member of the party felt a primal fear until the last raft scraped against the mud of the opposite bank. Having conquered the river, a sense of weary accomplishment settled over the caravan. They were now in territory that was nominally under the influence of the Serpent Kingdom. The end of their journey felt closer. But this feeling of security was shattered when the two swiftest scouts returned to the main party, their faces grim and their breathing ragged. They had not run for miles to bring good news. They spoke in low, urgent tones to the captain of the guard and the head priest. They had found signs of a large war party moving fast, attempting to circle ahead of them. The tracks were fresh, and the party was too large and too well-armed to be a simple band of raiders. They moved with a purpose. Whispers spread like wildfire through the camp. Who were they? Were they from the hostile kingdom they had bypassed? Or was it something more sinister? Perhaps a faction from Karnal itself, nobles who opposed the marriage and sought to prevent the alliance by eliminating the bride. Or, most chillingly, perhaps it was a betrayal from within Mutal. A rival noble house seeking to sabotage the Ajo's diplomatic triumph. The jungle, which had been a neutral force of nature, now felt actively hostile, its shadows filled with unseen, intelligent threats. The mood shifted from weariness to sharp, cold fear. The journey was no longer just a struggle against the environment, it had become a race against a hidden enemy. The captain of the guard, a man named Bialam, whose name meant jaguar, was a master of jungle warfare. He knew they could not outrun the war party on the established path. To continue was to walk into a trap. In a hushed council with the head priest and the lead diplomat, a daring plan was forged. They would use deception. Bialam selected a small group of his most trusted warriors. They would continue along the main path with a decoy litter made to look exactly like the princesses. They would travel openly, making just enough noise to be tracked, drawing the ambushers towards them. Meanwhile, the main party, with Ixcain and the bulk of the dowry, would divert. They would take a secret, far more difficult route, a forgotten hunter's trail that snaked through a treacherous swamp. It was a huge risk. The swamp path was dangerous in its own right, and splitting their forces weakened them. But it was their only chance. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, the switch was made. Ixcain was quietly transferred to a simpler, unadorned litter. She watched as the decoy party, a brave handful of men, marched off into the darkness, a deliberate sacrifice to ensure her safety. The weight of her importance and the cost of protecting it had never felt so heavy. The secret path was a nightmare. It was not a path at all, but a barely perceptible trail through a fetid swamp. The air was thick with the stench of stagnant water and rotting vegetation, and swarms of biting insects were a constant torment. The porters carrying the litters and the cargo sank to their knees in mud that sucked at their sandals. Tangled mangrove roots created a treacherous web, and every dark pool of water could conceal a snake or a caiman. Progress was agonizingly slow. The silence was different here, not the vibrant hum of the high jungle, but a dead, watchful quiet, broken only by the buzzing of flies and the squelch of their own footsteps. Ixcain had to abandon her litter for long stretches, her fine cotton dress ruined by mud and thorns, her skin covered in bites. She saw the strain on the faces of her protectors, the constant vigilance in their eyes. There were no omens to be read here, no grand vistas. only the grim, monotonous struggle for each forward step. This was the unglamorous reality of power, she realized. It was not the ceremony of the court, but the mud and fear of a desperate gamble in a forgotten swamp. It was a crucible that stripped away her title, leaving only a tired, frightened young woman pushing forward on pure will. After 2 days in the swamp, one of the scouts who had been shadowing the decoy party managed to backtrack and find them. He was exhausted and wounded, with a deep gash on his arm. The news he brought was both terrible and a profound relief. The decoy party had been attacked, just as Bialem had predicted. They were ambushed in a narrow ravine by a much larger force. The scout described a fierce, desperate fight. The warriors of Mutal, though vastly outnumbered, had fought like jaguars, selling their lives dearly to buy time for their princess. They were all lost. But in their sacrifice, they had confirmed the threat was real and that the decision to divert had been the correct one. A heavy silence fell over the small group. Ixcain felt a wave of grief for the men who had died for her, men whose names she barely knew. Their faces, seen briefly in the firelight of the camps, were now ghosts. The abstract political game had become terrifyingly real, written in the blood of her own people. The captain, Bialem, showed no emotion, but his jaw was set like stone. There was no time for mourning. The enemy now knew they had been tricked, and they would be hunting them. They had to keep moving. The swamp eventually gave way to firmer ground. The jungle began to thin, the canopy opening up to reveal more of the sky. The landscape started to show the signs of human influence once more. The telltale signs of slash-and-burn agriculture, small patches of maize and beans carved out of the forest. Then, one afternoon, from the top of a ridge, they saw it. It was not a pyramid or a palace, but a faint, hazy column of smoke rising into the sky miles away. It was the smoke from the cooking fires and workshops of a great city, their destination. A collective sigh of relief went through the party. They had made it. They had survived the jungle, the river, and the ambush. But for Ixcain, the relief was mingled with a new and powerful wave of apprehension. The end of the physical journey marked the beginning of a different, perhaps more difficult one. She was about to enter a foreign city, to marry a man she had never met, to live among people who were, until very recently, her sworn enemies. She was an outsider, a stranger, and her only value lay in the alliance she represented. The fear of the jaguar and the ambusher was replaced by the fear of the unknown future. As they drew closer, they were met not by an army, but by a formal welcoming party. A group of nobles from Karnal, the Serpent Kingdom, had come out to escort them on the final leg of their journey. They were dressed in their finest regalia, a vibrant display of power and respect. The meeting was a tense and highly choreographed affair. Bialem and his weary, mud-stained warriors stood opposite the pristine, brightly adorned soldiers of the Serpent Kingdom. The lead diplomat from Ixcain's retinue stepped forward and exchanged formal greetings with his Karnal counterpart. Speeches were made, extolling the wisdom of their respective rulers and the promise of the new alliance. Gifts were exchanged. Ixcain's party offered some of the few remaining fine textiles they had protected, and in return they were given fresh food, water, and cacao. Through the curtains of her now cleaned litter, Ixcain caught her first glimpse of her new people. Their clothing was different, the patterns on their textiles unfamiliar. They spoke her language, but with a different accent. It was all subtly, unsettlingly foreign. She was now under their protection, her fate in their hands. The long, perilous journey was over, but her trial had just begun. Her entry into the capital of the Serpent Kingdom was overwhelming. The city was as grand as Mutal, but different in its character. Its pyramids seemed more massive, more imposing, their architectural style heavier, almost brutal. The plazas were vast, and the city hummed with a different energy. The crowds that lined the main causeway were a sea of unfamiliar faces. They stared at her procession with a mixture of curiosity, awe, and perhaps suspicion. She was the foreign princess, the daughter of their traditional rival. The sounds were different, the smells were different. The very air felt alien. Her retinue, which had seemed so large and capable in the jungle, now felt small and isolated, an island of Mutal's culture in a vast carnal sea. They were guided to a set of rooms within the royal palace complex, luxurious, but also a form of gilded isolation. Here, she was bathed, dressed in new clothes provided by her hosts, and prepared for the final, most crucial moment of her arrival. The weight of her duty, of the thousands of lives that rested on this alliance, settled upon her. She had to be strong, poised, and perfect. She could show no fear. The moment finally came. Escorted by her own ladies-in-waiting and the carnal nobles, Ix-Kain was led into the great throne room. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in murals depicting the military victories of the Serpent Kings. At the far end, seated on a throne carved with the visages of guards and serpents, was the Adjur of Carnal, her betrothed. He was a young man, not much older than herself, yet his face was a mask of stern, royal authority. He was draped in jaguar pelts and an immense headdress of green and blue feathers. The room was silent save for the soft whisper of fans. Ix-Kain walked the long length of the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stopped before the throne, and as she had been taught since childhood, she performed the gestures of reverence due to a divine ruler. She did not look at his face, but kept her eyes respectfully lowered. He spoke, his voice formal and distant, welcoming her to his city. It was not the greeting of a lover or even a friend. It was the cold, calculated language of statecraft. This was not a union of hearts, but a merging of dynasties, a strategic move in a continental game of power. Her perilous journey through the jungle was over, but as she stood in the shadow of that foreign throne, she knew her true struggle for survival. The struggle to navigate the treacherous politics of this new court had only just begun. And so, our journey with Ix-Kain comes to a close, leaving her on the precipice of a new and uncertain life. Her story, while imagined, reflects the very real experiences of countless royal women throughout Maya history. They were not passive pawns, but courageous and vital actors on the political stage. Their journeys were acts of extreme bravery, diplomatic missions fraught with peril, where a single misstep could mean death or war. These women were the threads that wove the tapestry of Maya alliances, their lives spent building bridges between powerful and often hostile kingdoms. They were diplomats, pioneers, and the matriarchs of new dynasties, their influence shaping the course of their civilization in ways we are only just beginning to understand. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey tonight. I hope it has given you a small glimpse into the profound courage and duty that lay behind the stone facades of the ancient Maya world. If you'd like to continue exploring the forgotten corners of the past, please do subscribe and join us again. Until next time, sleep well.